All right, everybody, welcome. Thank you. This is the Breakthrough Youth Bible Study. I'm excited. We're going to be starting this new series that I have entitled Stories. As I shared with you guys earlier, I'm going to be interviewing my brother Elliott. So why don't we, Elliott, why don't you just go ahead and introduce yourself? How long you been coming to the church? What do you do for work? And the whole shebang.
The whole shebang. Okay. My name's Elliott. I've been coming to the church since 2008, so a long time, about 12 years. I started working in the gas company in 2012. God really opened a door and gave me favor with a career. Worked multiple jobs before then, but it was really something that I needed, stability and security, and I really dug in and God opened a door for that. I also do some financial coaching. I help people learn a lot of the stuff they didn't learn growing up, eliminate a lot of the frustration and confusion when it comes to money. And I also teach it from a biblical angle because Scripture teaches us a plethora of wealth on how to interact with money. And my wife is here, but she's hiding. Say hi, wife.
Hi, wife.
And that's a little bit about me, but we'll learn some more as we dive into this.
Awesome. Yeah. So obviously we've known each other a long time. You're one of the first people I met when I came into church. You're very involved, as you said. You do financial coaching. I know people have been touched by that ministry, and God's really helped you in your life. So we're going to kind of go through some questions, and you're going to kind of give us your story about what God's done in your life. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. So first question. When did you start coming to church? I don't know if you know the exact day. And what was it that brought you to church? How did you first hear about the church, the Potter's House here in Moreno Valley?
So, to my recollection, I don't remember the exact date, but as far as I can remember, I started coming to the church in March of 2008. And I remember that date specifically, or at least that month specifically, because that's when I had a serious encounter with Christ.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't really care about church. I didn't want to know God. It wasn't something that, I just didn't really care. But before that, to kind of lead up to it, I was 16 and I got kicked out of the house. And so I was my brother allowed me to stay with him for a little bit. And one of the prerequisites, if you will, was that I had to stop acting crazy and attend church with him. So against his better judgment, he allowed me to sleep on his couch. And so I did just that. I came to church, but I wasn't interested in God. I didn't care about Jesus or getting saved. I wasn't worried about my sin. I didn't care that I was going to hell. It wasn't a lot of that led me to Christ, but it did, in fact, bring me to church. I mean, in fact, I thought church was kind of stupid at first. And before he let me move in, I was homeless for a little bit. It wasn't very long, maybe, I don't know, a couple of months. But yeah, so I didn't really care about church. It wasn't something I was attracted to. It's not necessarily something I was raised in. All I knew is that I had to come to church in order to sleep on a couch. Fair trade.
That's good motivation, you know. I mean, so you said that your brother
Right.
Started coming to church, and that he told you in order to live there, you would have. How long was your brother going to church before you started coming?
I believe it was somewhere in the neighborhood of like 2 or 3 years.
So he was relatively newer in the faith, and he was already reaching out to you, hoping that God would get a hold of you.
Right.
That's awesome, you know, and I think that's vital that we as Christians, right, the people that know the Lord, reach out to people, especially those of our own family that don't know God. And, you know, God seems like God brought you to a situation where you could not refuse, you know.
Pretty much, yeah.
And, but man, you've come a long way since then, man, and we're going to get more into that. So my second question is, obviously you stated that you didn't care about church when you first started, and I can totally relate to that. I had the same exact attitude and mentality when I first started coming. But what was it that truly got you saved, right? That truly got you to come to a place of repentance and wanting to get your heart right? And then furthermore, after you just got saved, said the sinner's prayer, what got you locked into church? You know, because oftentimes we see people get saved, right? Because they have guilt of their sin, or maybe they want God to help them in something. But oftentimes, not so many people get locked into church after that. So what was it for you that not only you had that experience with God, but that kept you coming to church after that initial encounter?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It started many moons before that. My parents got divorced when I was like 2-ish. And so growing up in that home, in that environment, there was always something in my heart that really longed for something cohesive. I never really felt that I was a part of anything. I never really felt that I belonged anywhere, that I had a place to fit in. And so naturally that carried throughout my life, and I got really bitter and angry. And I mentioned earlier, it's why I got kicked out. So it wasn't necessarily like a disgust for my sin. It wasn't that I heard a message that my sin was going to send me to hell. I didn't really care at the time. I felt worthless anyway. When I got saved, I was ready to die. It sounds kind of strong, but I felt like I was ready to die because I didn't feel like I had a reason to live. And so it wasn't a message of like hope and faith in the gospel and repenting from your sin and being forgiven, because I didn't exactly care at the time. But what got me locked into the church is a pastor had taught a simple message about family. And for the first time in my life, I heard what a family structure was supposed to be. And it was something that was totally foreign. And it didn't all quite make sense, but I knew that what he was saying was so much better than what I had experienced. And I knew that if any part of that was true in reality, something in my heart told me that that's the way that it was supposed to be. And growing up, I always had this feeling in my heart that it shouldn't be this way. I didn't really know the difference. Being 2 years old all the way through the rest of my life, I didn't know that there was a different way. And most of my friends either didn't have a dad or their parents were never together. So I never knew that there was something different. And so when I heard a message for the first time that family was something that God ordained and it's something that he instituted, and that it wasn't supposed to be the way that I knew it, that's what attracted me. And I knew that if I had any chance of having some sense of normalcy or belonging or being a part of something like a family, that was it. And so for the first time, I just went up and prayed. I wasn't eloquent. I don't even remember what I said. It was just like, God, if there's any way that I could be a part of that, you can have my life. Which wasn't really a fair trade because I had nothing to show for it anyways.
It never is.
And that's, in a progression of time, that's kind of what locked me into, is that the more I came to church, the more I felt a sense of belonging and a sense of family and a sense of like God had a plan and a purpose for me. And so I felt that sense of cohesiveness, and I felt, the scripture escapes me at the time, but God does assemble us in a body. And I felt like I was being not just like gathered together. I felt like I was being assembled, like I was being put back together. And I had a place in this family, and that family was the church.
Just like a transformer, bro.
Right, exactly.
So you had said that you grew up in a broken home.
Yeah.
Were there any particular men in the church that you kind of saw that they were married, they had their lives together, something maybe you kind of want to model yourself after? Was there anybody who influenced you as far as being a man and pursuing God in the way a man should?
Yeah, absolutely. For the first time, I saw married couples interacting in a way that was like loving and kind and generous and authentic. And I had never experienced that. And so for a while, I was really apprehensive. I didn't think it was real, man, because I never experienced it. So I'm like, all these fools, a bunch of fakers up in here pretending church, everybody's looking fly and just putting on a show. So for a long time, man, I didn't believe it. I couldn't, because I'd never experienced that. But then, I just seen men genuinely love their wives and treat them in a way that you could tell that they cared, and it wasn't just a show. Pastor is a prime example, and he was so genuinely loving and caring for his wife. Men like Eddie, Yeah, there was tons of examples, just to name those few. I don't want to, give a litany of all the examples, but at the same time, I saw in the church, unfortunately, examples of ways that I never wanted to treat my wife.
Yeah.
Because there were similar things that I saw growing up, and things that I said to myself, I've seen in the church, like I would never speak to my wife that way. So there was good and bad, and you kind of just had to take the examples that were there and learn the best I could. And I had no idea how to be a man. So most of my very early discipleship was just learning how to grow up and
Yeah.
how to conduct myself in a proper way in the world. And that kind of translated eventually into being a good friend and a husband. And I learned a lot of that from Pastor just through discipleship. Also Dale, the way that he would, love his wife and care for her, and just the tenderheartedness that I had never experienced, man. At first I thought it was totally insincere and fake and disingenuous, but as Esteban too, man. Just the love of these people and for their kids is something I'd never experienced. And so it broke something inside of me that at first thought I was really guarded, and but it broke me down after a while to see that these folks are genuine. Like they actually love their family.
Yeah. Yeah. You mentioned that when you first saw, couples lovingly trying to serve God together, you almost thought it was fake, because all you've ever known was that brokenness. And,
Right.
so many people have that experience, not just in families, just in any area, where they say, hey, I can't believe things are like this, or I've only known it to be one way. But that's the great thing about church, is that you see so many people who were raised, who come from all different walks of life. And then you talked about examples. And the saying goes, you're going to be an example to somebody, whether it's for the right thing or the wrong thing. And, and we learn from either way. But for us personally, we want to strive to be that good example.
Right.
That example that someone could look to you. So that's encouraging to hear. Definitely. So my next question is, after you got saved, you were in church for a little while. What was the most difficult trial you faced after your salvation? And how did you overcome it? Was there people that were involved, or through prayer, through fasting? What was it that helped you overcome that difficult trial in your life?
Right. How personal you want to get, bro?
Personal as you're willing,
Okay, so it'll get pretty real here in a minute. The most difficult part of my salvation was the first year and a half to 2 years. Because like I said, I got kicked out. So at the time, I didn't know where my mom lived. I had left her house shortly before I moved in with my dad. And then he kicked me out because he found out I was selling illegal narcotics.
That'll do it.
Yeah. So, and at the time, I never thought that I would talk to my dad again. It was just one of those things. Like we already didn't have a fantastic relationship. Everything had fallen apart, and so I just, when he kicked me out, I was like, whatever. It didn't matter that much to me anyway. So, and not having a background, you can imagine that the overwhelming sense of hopelessness and insecurity and fear. And so one of the most difficult things I faced was I just felt so hopeless and lost, and that I couldn't see a way out of it. I couldn't see a future or a hope. And so there was a period of about 18 months where I got really, really depressed. Before I got saved, I was already suicidal. I didn't feel like I had any purpose to live. And everything in my head was just spiraling out of control. So it was a really difficult first 18 months. Luckily, I was working with my brother, but I got hurt. So I stayed home with his kids, and I raised his kids for about 2 years while he went to work. And that was kind of a fair trade. Like he didn't have to pay for a babysitter.
Yeah.
And both of the kids were infants at the time. So I was kind of just raising them and learning how to be an adult and a Christian. And the sleepless nights, the anxiety, the tears, man, all of it was real, bro. It was a very, very difficult time in life. On top of just not being able to sleep because I was so depressed. I was taking all kinds of medications that I don't want to mention just to be able to sleep. And none of it worked, man. I was just so lost and desperate, confused. I mean, before it's like I wanted to die, but now it's like I didn't want to kill myself anymore. I just wanted relief. Like I couldn't take who I was, or I couldn't figure out how I had got to this position in life. I couldn't reconcile the fact that I had no idea where my mom was, or that I was never going to see my dad again. All of it just came crumbling down, and the only thing I had was literally my backpack with like a couple changes of clothes and some toiletries, and I took it everywhere, just in case I didn't know if I was going to go back to my brother's house and sleep there, because I was still selling drugs. I had to make some money, so I never wanted to bring it back to his house. So there were times where I just disappear. But those first 18 months of just learning how to do this Christian thing, God had to do some serious miracles, man. There were nights where I would be totally high on all kinds of pills and drinks and all kinds of stuff just because I wanted to sleep, crying my eyes out literally all night, and then watching the sun come up and feeling even more hopeless, knowing that like I'm still high out of my mind, and now I have to take care of these kids for the day. And there was that whole year and a half or 2 years, the only sleep I really got was when I put the kids down for a nap. I was just so exhausted that I'd fall asleep. So that first year and a half was no joke, man. That was probably initially the toughest time, and the most difficult trials that I faced. And as far as the question is, how did I overcome it? Is I didn't have a choice, man. Where was I going to go? There was, eventually I got so sick and tired of it. I walked into pastor's office and I told him, I'm leaving. I'm done with life. I'm done with everything. I'm gone. I'm just going to go away. And I had just enough money saved to buy a ticket to Alaska. And I really like cold weather. And it was the furthest place in America that I could get and still be in the US. And I think everything in me just wanted to get away from everything I hated. And so pastor looked me straight in the face and he said, it doesn't matter where you go, you got to take you with you. And he said, you're free to leave, man. Go ahead. And so I blew a gasket and cussed him out in his office. And, he was just very, just temperance. He just kind of let me blow a gasket. And he said, don't slam the door on the way out. And so as I went to leave, I just started crying, man, because he was right. And I turned back around and I sat down. And that's when he told me, you could run as far as you want, but you have to take you with you. In other words, like it wasn't everything around me that was the situation. Like it was time for me to grow up and face who I was and the things that I had done. And he combined grace and truth just so beautifully. And it just broke me down. And I realized that I just can't keep running from who I am or who I was. And it's time to take responsibility. And the other way I overcome it is around the same time, I came across John 6:66, and it says, from this time, many disciples turned away and no longer followed him. And Jesus turned to his disciples and he said, do you want to leave too? And Simon Peter answered, Lord, to whom shall we go? You have the words of eternal life, and we believe and know that you are the Holy One of God.
Amen.
And that's what locked me in, because I finally came to that realization of where else am I going to go? Like I literally had nothing. Where was I going to go that I wasn't going to have anything? Or at least here, I had Christ.
Yeah.
And that's what kept me in.
Wow, that's pastor laid a heavy one on you there, man. You got to take you with you. Do you think that having a man like that, a pastor, right, someone over you that you can go and counsel to, you think that was like a lifeline for you at the time?
Oh, 100%, man. Pastor likes to work out. I had tons of anger issues.
Yeah.
I basically felt like I was robbed of a childhood, and I just became so full of rage, and it just boiled over into, pretty much violence. And so initially when I got saved, I'd go over to his house and just work out constantly. And he thought I was just trying to get in shape, but it's like, no, I have to do this so I don't rip somebody's head off. Like I had so much inside of me that I had to get out. And so him and his grace, man, he just beat the snot out of me every day. But I needed that. It was something that was And eventually he kind of, being as wise as he is, eventually he was kind of like, hey, dude, you need to forgive your dad. Like, this is a lot of where this is coming from.
Yeah.
And so he sat me down when I turned 18, and he was like, hey, man, you need to get in hold of your dad and contact him, and you guys need to have a serious talk and forgive him. And I think I cussed him out again, bro, because everything in my heart was like, dude, I haven't seen him in like 2 years. Like, there's no point. I don't care. And but he was right, and I did. Having that kind of leader in my life that knew what was best for me, because he saw that it was producing, it was manifesting itself outwardly because of what was boiling on the inside.
Yeah.
It wasn't just exercise. Like, he could tell, like, dude, you're not hitting me that hard to get a good workout. And so he eventually was like, you need to go home. You need to forgive your dad. And so that's what happened. And today, my dad and I have a great thriving relationship. We've reconciled, and we're like a million times better than it was growing up. And same thing with my mom, because shortly after reconciling with my dad, I've never heard him say anything like this, but he said, you need to call your mom, which was like, my brain exploded.
Yeah.
So I did. And eventually I found out where my mom was, and I went and visited her, and we reconciled that too. But it was because of Pastor Kerry that he confronted my nonsense and was like, dude, this isn't a constructive way to live. You can't do this. You can't just allow this stuff to eat you. Like, you have to forgive too, mainly because you've been forgiven.
Yeah. Wow. That's priceless. I mean, people don't really understand the value of having someone like that in their life until they really desperately need them.
Right.
And that actually segues into my next question. It's, what do you feel the church has added to your life that you would otherwise not have outside of the church? And I know you kind of shared a little bit in that last sequence there about having a pastor and even being able to reconcile a relationship with your dad.
Right.
But furthermore, I'm sure we could all sit down and talk countlessly of things that were added. But kind of, what are just some things that come to you off the top of your head that you have gotten in church, right? And I don't just mean spiritual things. I mean like practical things too,
Right.
life skills. What did you attain in the house of God that you would never have gotten anywhere else?
We don't have enough paper for that, bro. Yeah, but we could start out with the practical stuff. Let's not start with that. We'll get into that in a second. But I think the most basic thing I mentioned earlier was just that family. I had structure finally. Learning from my dad for the 16 years that I lived with him, I learned a lot of how to work hard. I learned work ethic. He taught me how to be clean, hygiene. He's a very hardworking redneck. He comes from back east, grown up on farms. It's like he woke up early and worked until the sun went down, and he really drilled that into my brother and I. So I'm so grateful for that. But as far as like family structure, that wasn't necessarily there between him and my mom. And so family was one of the biggest things that I found in church. And I was reading Psalms 68 verse 6. Let me flip that really quick because I don't want to misquote it. And this is one more thing that locked me into the church, and one of the things that I gained there that I couldn't have gotten from the world. It says, God sets the lonely into a family, and he leads forth the prisoners with singing. And that's exactly what I felt like. I felt like a prisoner, and I was ridiculously alone. I felt totally alone, and God, it's like he just plucked me out and put me in this family. And that's where I found a place of community, of support, a system that I belonged in, that I could add value to, that I could be valued and loved and cherished and taught. And so all those things that's what the church did for me. It wasn't just a place to come and have a community event. For me, it was a lifeline. It's like, literally, it's just like Peter said, where else am I going to go? I got nothing. And that's where I learned things like how to be a man, things like going to work, things like faithfulness, how to get my emotions in control. God, that was a huge one, because the entire time growing up, I didn't know what to do with my emotions. And so I just bottled them all up. And what that turned into is just a lot of violence and rage, because I wanted to see people hurting outwardly the way that I was hurting on the inside. And I learned that ain't right. And so I really had to confront who I was soberly, like literally. Like you can't just drink yourself into oblivion to escape. You have to face who you are. And I learned all that stuff in the church. I learned how to love my wife. I learned how to be a husband. And the very nature of being a husband is more than just marrying a woman. You know, it was caring for a household, for yourself. I learned things like being faithful with little, and then I could be trusted with being faithful with much. I learned how to serve. And, you know, like we mentioned in the very beginning, I had no idea how to manage finances. I learned that in the church. And pastor eventually in his grace gave me opportunities to share my story. And so I learned things like public speaking. I learned through serving in the church how to do things like project management and organize community events. And that translated into the experience that I got at work, things that I could put on my resume, basic job skills. There was a lot of things in the church that eventually needed to be fixed. And so I got tons of work experience doing that, just volunteering. The church provided so much more than just a place to belong. It developed so many life skills and developed relationships like you and I have. And I wanted to take a step back too, because one of the other major difficulties I faced as a young man was just an overwhelming lust. I don't know how to say it other than that. And coming from the background I did, it wasn't lust growing up. That was just what everybody did. There was no other. Right. It wasn't wrong. It wasn't nasty. It was just what everybody did. And so after coming to church and learning that like you can't conduct your life that way, it's like, well, how am I supposed to do any different? I've never been taught anything else. And it was developed through a relationship with our pastor, with you in particular, Vince, because there were stuff that I was so ashamed of, and I hid it for years, man, years. Operating in ministry, like I was faithful, I was grown up in the church and serving well and involved in ministries, but underlying all of it was just this overwhelming sense, and it was just like this 800-pound silverback gorilla that was on top of me, and I didn't know how to get rid of it. You know, I had no idea what to do, and I was so ashamed I couldn't even come forward with it. But eventually, it all came crashing out, you know. And that hurt, but it was one of the biggest and best trials that God ever put me through, because it was another one of those times where I had to confront who I was instead of hiding it and being embarrassed and ashamed. And so a couple of guys in the church, you in particular, helped me walk through a lot of that and prayed me through a lot of that and held me accountable to it. And I realized it wasn't just a me thing, it's a human thing.
Yeah.
And so it's like, it wasn't just me being ashamed because I was hiding a lot of this sin. It's like I was ashamed because I didn't know that anybody else dealt with it the way that I did. So when people that had overcome it before and got breakthrough through it with it previously were able to walk me through it, and I never would have gotten that outside of the church.
Absolutely.
You know, I never would have had to confront that in the world, because it's not a thing. It's not a thing in the world. It's not something to be ashamed of. In fact, it's propagated and promoted.
Yeah.
And then I had to, you know, come clean to my prospective wife, because of who I was in the past, and a lot of that stuff came spilling out. And with her grace and guidance, and with our pastor, I mean, it's like nothing was hidden anymore. And that was one of the hugest blessings in our relationship, is just absolute transparency. Because it's like, well, where do we go from here? And so that's one of the greatest blessings we have now, is just this open, transparent communication. I think I went way too long there, but in a sense,
it's good, man. Everything you said is good. I think one of the biggest things you talked about was accountability. You know, that you don't get that in the world. There is no accountability. Everyone is their own boss. They run their own show. They're the captain of their own ship. And, you know, who's to tell you what to do? That's not paying your bills or, you know, providing for you. It's your life. You do what you want. But that's opposite of what God teaches. You know, it talks about putting yourself under headship, being accountable to people around you, you know. And that's one of the great blessings. I know it doesn't seem like that way at first, when people are just like, hey, man, what are you up to? What are you doing?
Right.
Hey, why weren't you in church? You know, it seems like people are just being on you for the sake of being on you, but it's accountability.
Right.
And that's something that the church strives on, you know, is just people holding each other accountable Man, yeah, a lot of good stuff you said there.
Well, let me add to
Mm,
that really quick.
Go for it.
It wasn't just the accountability; it was the support system. The relationship, because I forget the exact scripture, but it sounds like a contradiction. I think it's in James where he says, "Bear your own burdens," and then like the next verse says, like, "Bear everybody else's burdens." You're
Yeah,
like, wait a second, like, how am I supposed to do both?
yeah,
Uh, but a great illustration I heard was it's the principle of a boulder in a backpack. It's like there's certain things that you can shoulder, like there's certain things that you can carry. Like stop being stupid, right? Like just make good, moral, righteous decisions, and the Holy Spirit will help you do that. And as you practice that, um, you could just stop being stupid. You can make better choices. But then there's things like boulders, like that lust, where I had no control, man, and I needed that support system and those relationships to help me to bear the burden of that. And so I've learned how to do that also, being on the other side of that. It's like now I'm able to turn around and be that blessing for others as well. And it's like I have my backpack. There's things that I can carry, right?
yeah.
But there's also burdens that we help each other carry. And part of that is accountability. And part of that's the relationship and the community and the support and the discipleship. All that's tied into this entire family structure.
Yeah, and then most of the men, obviously, that helped you were probably men who experienced the same thing, had gone through the same thing, and they learned how to overcome it. And just like you said, you're helping other people; they were doing the same for you, and that's like the MO of the church, is life experiences and being able to help people get through things. So, yeah, man. I mean, just hearing that from you just reminds me of all the times that I was helped, and the people that
Right.
helped me. And now going forward, we're doing the same thing, passing on what we were given.
Right.
So that brings me to my last question. How was your salvation changed from when you were a young man, right? Obviously, me and you grew up in the 24/7 Bible study at Eni. From that to being an adult, right? Now turning around, we're the youth leaders and we're imparting things into other young people. How has your salvation changed from being a young man to adulthood?
Man, that's a fantastic question. One of the biggest changes I saw was I was able to trust God more. And, part of it was when I was 18 or 19, I had to find my own place to stay. And, God opened a door for me to live in this little studio apartment behind the Loco Burrito.
I remember that one, man. Good times there, man.
And, man, the times, that entire season of my life was just moving into that place was a total move of God. And it
Yeah,
was one of the principles. I felt like the presence of God saying, if you could be faithful with this little hole in the wall in the ghetto,
yeah,
living on food stamps, bro. Like God was like, if you could be faithful here with my beat up used car, he's like, I'll give you increase. And he
man.
gave me a vision of that very early on. And just learning how to grow and be faithful with the little that God gave me and trust him. And just trust him, because I'd been through so many situations in the past where it's like, God, there's really no other option except you meet this need, or like I'm not. And that was just a little example of one of them. And growing from a young adult into adulthood, that age old cosmic struggle that's so necessary, from going from a place from total dependence on other people for everything. And just that tension, you could just feel like you're bending to the breaking point, because you're trying to gain that independence without any ability to make it there on your own, and being totally reliant on God. And that little studio compartment was part of my breakthrough. And God allowing me just like a little seed of like, let's see what you do with that little bit of independence.
Yeah.
And that was the first time that I ever truly like lived on my own in total reliance with God. And I mean, you remember, bro, we're reading meters part time, and
Mm-hmm.
actually before that, I was working full time as a process server in Riverside County, serving legal documents.
Man. Remember those days?
And hardly making any money, bro. It was God, it was so rough, but God showed me his faithfulness and really taught me, just like Proverbs 3, I think it's 3:5. He taught me not to lean on my own understanding. And because none of it made sense. And so everything in me was just like, God, I'm tired of the struggle. I'm beat up. I'm tired. Like, I just want stability. But constantly God gave me opportunities to trust him. And God's like, your stability doesn't come from anything else but me. And time and time again, I found that stability. And so as I grew into adulthood and overcoming obstacles and different barriers that were there, man, and people in the church that were, I remember one specific example, man, this was, again, back in that first 18 months of my salvation. And I felt like it was my responsibility to feed my brother's kids. And, we're all broke. Everybody was poor, man. We're all on government assistance. Everything just sucked. And I remember I was finally to the point where I was just broken. And so I was going to go rob this liquor store. And because that's what we did growing up. And and so I remember I got ready, bro. I had my equipment. I'm ready to go do this thing. And I just put the kids down for a nap and I'm about to duck out and I'll be right back. And as soon as I opened the door, Esteban and Christina were there with bags of groceries. Like, hey man, I didn't know if anybody was home, but God just put it on our hearts to bring some basic stuff by.
Wow.
And it was things like that people seem that are insignificant. Like, he didn't know that I took that stuff back inside and just wept.
Yeah.
And so it was events like that, just little moments of God's faithfulness that transformed me from this jacked up youth into God, I can trust you in my adulthood. I can trust you with my life. I can trust you with my future, with my wife, with my calling. It's my entire being is wrapped up in who he is and what he did and not what I can do. And so just learning that and falling in a deep, loving, meaningful relationship with my Savior and seeing his character and his faithfulness all throughout, getting saved when I was 15 or 16, all the way to now, it's just moment after moment after moment being totally reliant on God. And it's so humbling. The more he's grown and increased, it's the smaller I feel. And I don't know if I can explain that or articulate it, but it's the career path that he has us on and the calling that he's placed on my wife and I, the more increase God brings in a spiritual and in a natural sense, it's the smaller I feel, the more reliant I become, because it's I know who I am and I don't deserve any of this. And it's this is totally beyond my comprehension. And I so need God to walk me through this. And it's this overwhelming, God, I just so need you, because I'm going to totally mess this up without you, outside of your will. And that's where he's kind of transitioned me. And I don't think there's ever been a moment where it's God, I just trust in the career you gave me, or now that I'm able to use my brain in an intellectual way. All of that I know is 100% only because of God. And if not for him, it's just like Paul says, there but by the grace of God go I. I don't know how else to say it, man. Just that's how he transformed me into adulthood, to just be totally and absolutely reliant on him no matter what.
Yeah. I think John the Baptist said it perfectly. He must increase and I must decrease.
Oh, yeah. John 30:31, I think.
Yeah. And man, a lot of good stuff, man. A lot of good stuff, and obviously you and I have had a really good relationship over the years. And you talked a little bit about, things we've gone through, and you've helped me along the way too,
Yeah.
That's what it is in relationships. It's not just one person taking, one person giving. It's give and take, You give to me, I give to you. You invest in my life, I invest in your life. And we build each other up that way,
Right.
And that's what relationships are all about.
It's reciprocal, man. It really is. And that's why God says, I fill you up so that you can overflow.
Exactly.
And just coming from a place of total emptiness, now being able to have God's Spirit overflow, it's literally the most humbling experience I've ever had in my life. Just God's faithfulness through it all, man.
Yeah, and I know there's plenty more that you would like to say. Unfortunately, we are running out of time. But one thing I wanted to ask you personally was, um, do you think that God would have fulfilled all these things in your life if you were not faithful coming to church initially, if you were not faithful in things like tithes and offerings, if you weren't faithful, like you said, with those small things, do you think that God would have done all these great things in your life?
No, man, God wouldn't have been able to trust me. um,
Yep.
I growing up, I learned how to fake it till I made it, and so there was an amount of things that I learned that I could have made it only so far outside of God's help, but outside of relationships with folks like you, I'm like, dude, like we've cried together like big unmanly alligator tears, right?
Yep.
Um, if not for stuff like that, dude, I'm afraid of where I'd be outside of the presence of God. Like I deserve to be in prison, bro. And so trying to make it on my own, that terrifies me, bro. And knowing who I am and what I'm capable of, and the sin that lurks like just on the other side of my heart, man. Um, that terrifies me to no end, and it draws me to repentance like every day. Because I know that God's placed in me an immense capability to do good and serve, but there's also an equally immense sin.
Yeah. There's always that struggle, internal struggle, spirit versus flesh,
Right. But no, to answer your question, I don't think so, man. I think I would have been able to fake it for a really good long time, but eventually it would have come crashing down in probably the worst way. And I don't know if I would have been able to take it. Who knows, man? I don't know.
Yeah. And final question. To those in the youth group and to any who may be listening, what are some advice you would give a young person who's really trying to serve God, really trying to be faithful? What's the one thing that you would go back and tell your younger self uh, to help you along the way?
Man, I don't know. I was so jaded and jacked up. I don't know if anybody's words were going to help, man. All I knew is that Christ was the only thing that I could cling to. Um, Literally, just like Peter said, like, where else am I going to go? I mean, just looking back and examining the circumstances, like I literally had nothing and no other option but to serve God. But for some of the young folks that do have an option, the Bible's very clear that sin is pleasurable. Jesus says it very clearly. Solomon teaches it in Ecclesiastes. You could do whatever you want to do, but there's consequences. And he
Yeah,
said,
absolutely.
youth to serve God. And Jesus was really clear too that it might bring pleasure for a season, but in its end, Solomon said it too, it will lead to death and destruction.
Yeah.
So use the strength of your youth to serve God and honor Him, because ultimately, I wish I would have prayed for His will from the very beginning, because there was a lot of stuff in my life that I wanted to see because it's stuff that I had grown up without. But God's will was always so much better than the things that I had asked for. So seek Him. I think it's Matthew 6:33. Seek Him and His righteousness first.
Yeah.
Like first thing, and He'll add everything to your life. And so if you feel like there's a void or an emptiness, regardless of your background or where you come from or whatever walk of life that you're in, His faithfulness is enduring from everlasting to everlasting. And every time that there's been a void in my life that needed to be filled, when God told Moses, I am, it didn't make sense to me for a long time, until I really started to examine the stuff in my heart that was jacked up. And it's like every time I needed something to fill that void, it was always God saying, I'm the piece that's going to fill that.
Man.
So God is the answer. Christ is the answer 100%. Read your Bible. Dig deep. This is a mirror. It's living and breathing. This is going to transform you by the renewing of your mind, and God knows I needed that. I think that's good.
Well, thank you, Elliott. I appreciate you being here, being honest. This has been Stories Breakthrough Bible Study. We'll see you guys again next time.